All right.
All right. Are we ready?
Is everybody ready? Okay, perfect. Good afternoon, everyone. I would like to welcome you to our webinar in May. So this year is brought to you by the CIES Study Abroad and International Students Special Interest Group, Star Scholars and Network, and the Journal of International Students. My name is Jenna Gao. I'm from the George Washington University, and I will be your host today. My colleague Krishna probably or Karine will join me to moderate the Q&A throughout the session. So as always, I would like to acknowledge Ottawa University for their continuous technical support. Thank you so much. For those who are new to our webinar, each month we feature a panel of study abroad and international student experts. We explore the research and practice related issues in study abroad and international students. Besides, we offer mentorship opportunity on academic and professional development in the international education sector. So the topic for this month is globally connected teaching and learning. For before the chat, first I would like to have some housekeeping. If you can hear me well, please click raise your hand button at the bottom of your screen. Thank you. If you can't hear me or the screen is a little bit fussy, please refresh your browser window. Please make sure your speakers are connected. So we welcome your comments and questions, so feel free to enter them in the Q&A box below, and we will try our best to answer them throughout or at the end of the webinar. And yes, there will be a full video recording of the webinar available online, so please share them with other colleagues who may be interested. All right, so today we have five panelists actually for join us this session, and one maybe experience some technical briefly. For the panelists, if I call your name, please wave at the audience so everybody know you. So first, our guest speaker, Sarah Guth. All right, Sarah Guth is the president of a UNI Collaboration. So UNI Collaboration is a cross-disciplinary organization for tele-collaboration and a virtual exchange in higher education. And she teaches English as a foreign language at the University of Padova, Italy. So she was a program coordinator at the SUNY Course Center and designed their first professional development program. Sarah's research focused on the intercultural communication and the normalization of a virtual exchange in higher education. As project manager from UNI Collaboration participation in the consortium that is leading the European Commission's pilot project, Erasmus Plus Virtual Exchange. She's joining us today from Padova, Italy. Our next presenter, unfortunately, she still is not able to join us right now. If she come in, I will introduce her later. Our next presenter is Antitha Andosi. She is a virtual exchange program coordinator and a Solia. And Solia is an international nonprofit organization preparing the next generation with the skills, attitude, and a commitment to engage with difference constructively. She's also a cross-cultural facilitator who helps students comfortably explore perspective, uncover biases, and arrive at a better understanding of cultures. Besides her MA degree in intercultural studies and media, Antitha has a deep interest in citizen journalism and peace building, and that's why she's on a lifelong learning journey. She's joined us today from Tunis, Tunisia. All right, so next presenter, Julie Hawk. Julie Hawk is a senior facilitation officer for the Sharing Perspective Foundation, where she is passionate about enable an increased and diversified group of people to access learning, exchange, and intercultural dialogue opportunity through online education and virtual exchange. She has been designing peace-building curriculum for online learning, as well as helping groups and individuals navigate through conflict, strained relationships as facilitator and mediator since 2011. Julie obtained her MA in Conflict Resolution as a Lewis Fellow from the Joseph Colbert School of International Studies at the University of Denver, and she's joined us today from Michigan. All right, so last presenter, Carine Ullom. Ullom is Associate Dean of Instructional Innovation at Ottawa University. She was a double major in computer science and German as an undergrad. Because of her interest in both technology and cultures, she got a Fulbright grant to study computer-assisted language learning at Oldenburg University in Germany in 1980. In 2013, when she designed and co-taught her first online virtual exchange courses involving students out of the university and the university in Skopje, Macedonia. She has been designing and teaching virtual exchange courses, researching the impact of virtual exchange, and training faculty how to design and develop virtual exchange ever since. She's a certified Solia facilitator and is a training officer on the board of Union Collaboration. She's joining us today from Ottawa, Kansas. So before I give each of you approximately 1 to 2 minutes to introduce your organization, I would like to turn it over to Karine for a brief overview of the definition of globally connected teaching and learning. Karine.
Thank you, Janet. And thank you to my fellow panelists for giving us your time today. So just to give us a quick working definition of what it is that everyone who's here today is planning to share with you, the overall concept. It goes by several names. It goes by names like COIL and virtual exchange and online international learning and a half a dozen other things. So globally connected learning is sort of an umbrella term for lots of various models, which we're going to share with you the various ways that we do this. And so this is an attempt to provide, if you would like, sort of a written textbook definition. So these are learning experiences that are carefully designed. That's important. So all the keywords are highlighted in blue to encourage and support constructive cross-cultural communication, collaboration, and/or dialogue between individuals or groups who are geographically distant and/or from different cultural backgrounds. And these experiences are, by definition, technology-enabled, and they're sustained over time. So they're conducted through some sort of institutional partnership. They're based on a curriculum, and they're guided by someone, either a facilitator or a faculty member, and supported. So GCTL leverages ubiquitous, robust, and reliable technologies to bring the potentially transformative impact of meaningful intercultural experience to everyone. And this definition borrows from previous definitions written by the Virtual Exchange Coalition and the Evolve project in Europe. So with that, hopefully that gives you a bit of context about what we consider to be globally connected teaching and learning, and we're going to share with you the various ways that that happens. And so with that, I will turn off the screen share and turn it back over to you, Janet.
Thank you, Karine. And Sarah, would you like to start by briefly introducing your organization?
Sure, thank you. Thank you both Janet and Karine for inviting us to participate in this today. As Janet said, I'm president of Union Collaboration, and Karine is one of the training officers of our organization. We are based in Spain, and so we're a European organization. And I think our history is an important part of what we are today, that we very much came out of a group of foreign language teachers who were involved in what we call telecollaboration. Karine mentioned earlier that there are many different terms for this kind of activity. And telecollaboration was bringing together language students, foreign language learners in different places to learn from one another. But it became clear to us over the years that our language students were engaging with students who were not only language students, but from other disciplines as well. And the real aim of what they were doing was not necessarily language learning, but the cultural learning, the cross-cultural interaction and intercultural learning that was going on. And as a result of several European projects, we decided in the end to create the organization. So in the name of our organization, we have both telecollaboration and virtual exchange because as this field is growing, and it really is kind of in a boom phase right now, virtual exchange seems to be the term that is bringing us all together. And so we are an organization of telecollaboration and virtual exchange. And our aim is, we have several aims, but it really is to promote the field. And we've recently set up a journal because it was clear to us that many people were engaging in these kinds of globally connected learning activities, but maybe publishing in their discipline-specific journals, for example, and there wasn't much communication going on between people who were actually engaging in this in the field. And so we established a journal, the Journal of Virtual Exchange, and we have conferences. The upcoming one is the IVEC conference in Tacoma, Washington in October of 2019. And as part of our mission, we also want, in growing the field, we are also a member of the consortium that is promoting Erasmus Plus Virtual Exchange. I'm not sure how many people are familiar with the Erasmus program, but it's the study abroad program in Europe. And this is an attempt on the part of the Commission to pilot projects that, in addition to the study abroad, the physical mobility, also the virtual exchange element. And we are one of the members of the consortium, along with the organizations that Julie and Intitar represent. So I will pass it over to them and they can share their organization's role in this. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you, Sarah. And Tifa, would you like to be the next?
Okay, sure. So first, thank you, Janet and Karine, for inviting us and for hosting this webinar. Soleil is actually an international nonprofit organization working at the intersection of peace building, global education, and technology. Our programs mainly aims at providing participants with 21st century skills and raising their cross-cultural understanding, including critical thinking, collaboration, and communication. And we have two main programs. So the Connect program, where we work with post-secondary youth from North America, Europe, the MENA region, and South and Southeast Asia. So we bring those students together in virtual rooms in groups of 10 to 12 participants over 4, 5, or 8 weeks. So it depends on the model of the program because we have like 4 sub-programs. To date, Talia has worked with more than 13,000 students from a diverse cross-section of over 200 institutions in 30 countries. And when we say institutions here, we talk about institution of higher education or language learning, education, or even community-based organizations. And the second program is the facilitation program, or the facilitation training program, which we implement to train the facilitators and then provide them with the skills on how to guide the participants to achieve the program goals and maybe to become facilitators themselves. So this is a brief introduction about what the organization is actually doing. Thank you.
Thank you, helping us understand SOLIA as an international profit organization. I'm going to turn it to Julie from the Sharing Perspective Foundation.
Sure. Hi, everyone. You'll be hearing some of the similar things as we're all working in this virtual exchange field. I'm here representing the Sharing Perspectives Foundation. We're an organization based out of Amsterdam, and we've been around since about 2013. We think that every student should be able to have an international and intercultural exchange experience as a part of their education. And so we provide sort of plug and play programs for universities or institutions to implement alongside their students that involve one curriculum that's based on a current relevant socio-political topic that then students from all of these different countries study together. So the real goal of these programs is to, in some ways, connect what they're learning in theory in their classrooms to practice and actually engaging in an exchange experience and sort of practicing that intercultural dialogue instead of just learning about it as other programs would have them do. Our current participants are generally either second or third year bachelor students or master's students located either in Europe or in the Southern Mediterranean, as we are implementers also of the Erasmus Virtual Exchange Program that Sarah introduced to you. Our latest programs have been about the socio-political situation of the so-called refugee crisis. And so our current participants are focused on having a range of migration backgrounds as well. So we have students and sort of refugees and non-refugees that are participating in these programs and engaging with the topic together. But that's changing. It changes every year. So some of the other topics that we've covered in our courses are things like the European economic crisis, newcomers and nationalism. We have another program coming up on populism, as well as we offer shorter, very topic-specific based courses depending on institutions' needs, like gender inequality in the media or food sustainability in the Mediterranean. So we have a range of topics, the important thing being that it's based around one curriculum that's topic-specific, that's relevant across borders, and then bringing people to learn about that together in a format that involves a pedagogy that we've developed that includes sort of bite-sized, accessible expert content paired with live sessions, live dialogue sessions that are facilitated, in addition to collaborative assignments that they do together as students. So I'm happy to tell you more about all of those things in questions if they come up.
Sure. So our last presenter, Karine, it's your turn.
Thank you. So I come at this from the perspective of instructional design and learning experience design at the university level and from the faculty perspective. So and I don't represent a specific organization necessarily, but one of the things I wanted to highlight in what we just heard was that obviously there are multiple models, but Intidar and Julie represent models that have the curriculum available sort of in advance, and the theme and the topic and the platform, whereas the type of virtual exchange that I've been involved in is course-specific, faculty-to-faculty, fairly grassroots, choose your own tools. Intidar and Julie use a program-specific platform that was designed for a very carefully managed experience with facilitators versus a type of virtual exchange where you're trying to build it into an existing course and working with a partner in another country and putting the students in those separate courses together, whereas in the example, especially with Intidar, that example might be a mixture of students from various institutions. So yeah, that's my background is from developing from the ground up and training other faculty how to do the same thing.
Thank you, Karine. So in the next 30 to 40 minutes, we have a few questions that will guide our panel today. From the audiences, for some of you who might arrive later, we have a Q&A box below the scenes. So please make sure if you have any question, post your question there. We would like to help you answer them throughout the session or at the end of the session. So the first set of questions is try to helping those who of you are not familiar with the VE, virtual exchange, right? So if you can help us understand what is actually the virtual exchange and who is engaging in the virtual exchange, that will be helpful for us to understand. All right, to start.
I'll take a stab at it just because I tried with the introduction or at the beginning to define this pedagogy. And yes, VE has become sort of the shortcut. So when you hear us saying virtual exchange, we mean any way that we are connecting students across cultures using technology. That's sort of the shortcut answer. And it's happening from, in the US, we call it K-12, but from elementary, secondary, higher education and youth organizations, and even some civil organizations trying to bring people together who have very big differences, big cultural differences. But I would say that the primary focus is in higher ed and in researching the impact of, that's at least my background, is trying to understand how this pedagogy impacts. Is it transformative for the students who may not otherwise have a cross-cultural experience? To Julie's point, the statistics, at least in the US, show that undergraduate students in the US, only 10% of them have a, quote, study abroad experience anytime in their undergraduate experience. And we could talk about what it even means to have a study abroad. That includes a 10-day trip to London and Paris. That's considered study abroad under that definition. So what about the other 90% who are not having any kind of immersive or carefully thought out cross-cultural experience? So that's I think probably one of the overarching themes here for all of us is why we do this work. Sarah, I saw you started to comment.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
Yeah, I would just I agree with everything that Karine said, and I think it's really about connecting people, and I think the grand idea of the internet and that we'd all become one great community and share our ideas and be more understanding has proven not to be true. And so I think what we're trying to do is that people are very much siloed into their communities or their bubbles or whatever term you would like to use. And what we're trying to do is connect people to people they might not otherwise be in contact with. So that could be somebody who is geographically very distant, or it could be somebody who is geographically not particularly distant, but maybe culturally so. In the case of the United States, for example, I think of, for example, the urban-rural dichotomy that we seem to have going on right now. That it's useful for people to talk to one another. This idea of contact theory is the kind of research term for it, but that you have people to come together, to talk to one another, to listen to one another, to reflect on why they think what they think and have the assumptions that they have. And you can really do this in any discipline. And I think that's something I guess I would like to highlight, that it was kind of natural for us to do it in language learning because obviously it's interesting to learn to communicate with people in another language. But in the end, we're all a part of this globally connected world right now. And so the idea is to use these new tools, the social media and internet technologies, to bring people together, but in a very structured way. I think that's what really needs to be pointed out. It's not just, because I think if it's not structured, people stay in their bubbles, but in a structured way where there is facilitation on part of the educator or the tutors to guide the dialogue and interaction among these young people so that they really learn to listen to one another and reflect on why they think things the way they do. So.
Thank you, Sarah. I think you sort of answer, the question I'm going to ask next. What are the tools that make virtual exchange possible? You talk about social media as the tool used in the virtual exchange. I wonder if any panelists have any other thoughts on the tools that could be used in the virtual exchange, have used in the virtual exchange, and we may future using the virtual exchange. Any ideas?
I can add to this, and building off of Sarah's point about structure, I think an important distinction to make is that virtual exchange isn't virtual encounter, which is often, I think, used erroneously to say, oh, we've brought people into a shared Facebook group and look, they're exchanging. But it's to this point of structure and design that Sarah's mentioned, that this is very an intentional process. Towards that end, the specific tools that are used can be varied, but it depends on that design and that structure and that process. So Zoom this is a great one. We use other video exchange platforms as well. I found at the Sharing Perspectives Foundation, at least, that there's sort of a spectrum of good practices where if you can get someone together in a live online video meeting like this, might be sort of at the top level. And at the bottom level would be some sort of text exchange. And in the middle, there's audio exchanges, there's asynchronous video exchanges, there are asynchronous forums. So there's sort of a spectrum of things, but I still think that this kind of live synchronous meeting is really important to the definition.
Thank you, Julie. And Titha, do you have anything to add on?
Yeah, actually in Solia we have our own platform, which is the Exchange portal. So it's a kind where you meet with your peers in different groups. And it's like a kind of a tool like Skype or WhatsApp or Zoom or wherever. It's just more secure when it comes to the personal information and those kind of personal information that need to be secured. Again, here the tools can mean other things, like, for example, for me, the language is a tool for communication and exchange. And from what I'm hearing is that all the programs that we're talking about are conducted in English or held in English. So English, the language, is actually a tool for virtual exchange here. So we can talk also about the language. And for example, in the facilitation training program, we have like programs implemented in French or in Arabic or in English. So we have that variety. Here it is. So this is the platform. So it's a kind of circle. In the middle, there's a chat box where people can actually write their thoughts, or if when you don't hear a thing, you can just ask there. So, but like I said, like language also, so to add on what the others already said, language also can be a tool here, and participants should be able to express themselves. So they need to have like a minimum level at the language that we're gonna use.
Thank you very much for sharing that slides with us. So my next question is associated with the cost. We know that cost is associated with every single aspect of higher education. So what are the costs associated with the VE?
So it varies, right? It depends on whether you're using what I call turnkey operations versus grassroots, and that's a vast oversimplification, right? So you can see that Solia has a platform, Sharing Perspectives use the same platform, and that platform, needs some funding to support it. So, and they have various funding models. I'll let them talk about that. If it's a grassroots, what I call grassroots, but a do-it-yourself. So the two sides I usually call it is turnkey and do-it-yourself, and there's lots of gray area in between. But if you are attempting to build your own virtual exchange project, there can be no cost. It just really depends. If you have access to the tools, and to build on that idea of the tools, besides Zoom, sometimes people use a learning management system like Canvas or Blackboard, depending what's available among their institutions. But that can get complicated depending on who's allowed to use them. But there are other free tools like Flipgrid and Padlet and so forth. So with a cobbled together, collection of free tools, you can make this happen without cost, pretty much. Does anybody want to add to that, Sarah?
So actually, I want to chime in quickly because we have a question from the audience regarding the Flipgrid that you just mentioned.
Oh, okay.
So the Gunther, hi Gunther. I think every panelist can see this question, but I will still read this out loud. I've created several university-level online exchange based on the Flipgrid. For example, between Chile, Azerbaijan, and Vietnam. I've learned a few tips from this, but I found that the most successful exchanges actually involve a lot of nagging from the instructors in the beginning. A few weeks into it, students seem to have more interest and need less guidance. Has this been a case for many of you, this seemingly obligatory nagging?
Okay, I'm going to intervene here because it's something I've been doing for about 15 years. I think it's really important when you talk about cost to recognize that it's not a no-cost endeavor, what we're talking about. There is a high cost in terms of human resources.
Right, human resources, yeah.
And it really does, it does take its toll on the part of the professors or teachers or practitioners or tutors who are engaging their students in this kind of activity. And this is why it's so important for institutions to recognize this kind of work and what's being done, because it's not no cost. It is a cost in terms of human resources. And you do need to nag students. You do need to structure things very carefully beforehand, in such a way that they will be interacting with one another, and it's the way you design tasks and design activities, and a lot of the work that we do at Uni Collaboration is training, and training takes time, and teachers spend 4 weeks in our basic training, 6 weeks in our advanced training, and it's very time intensive. And so I think the issue here is that there needs to be recognition on the part of our institutions, so long as we're talking about universities and colleges and higher education, in terms of career progression, time release, course release, these kinds of things, because it takes a lot of time on the part of people who are engaging in it.
And that's specific, even more so for people who are designing their own and trying to do the grassroots way. It's not trivial for the way that Sharing Perspectives in Celia does it either, but that's one of the advantages of the quote unquote turnkey version, right? Because it's the heavy lifting is already done. Julie?
Yeah, yes and no. I'd say we still require some nagging, but we think about this as incentives, actually, that for some students, and speaking to the second part of your question, Gunther, for some students, they just see the inherent benefit of being able to communicate with someone they wouldn't otherwise be able to, the professional skills that come along with that and how they can use that on their CVs, and they sort of get it. But lots of times those actually aren't the most interesting students to have in the exchanges, and we actually want a sort of core group that wouldn't otherwise be there. And so that's where I think the incentives come in. So if whatever our institutions that we're partnering with can do to offer a course credit, to make it a pre-internship requirement, to do something that's a sort of an offline connector, because we found that just having the online connection isn't enough to grab everyone and keep them there. So whatever offline networks we can draw upon, we try to.
Sure. I saw Gunther has another question, which is related to the next set of questions I'm going to ask. The best practice for virtual exchange. I would like to get your idea. How do you get prepared to do the virtual exchange? And how do you encourage the students and the faculty members to take advantage of virtual exchange? And then Gunther, hopefully we ask questions too.
This one's a little trickier in terms of faculty incentives. It gets back to what Sarah mentioned. But if it were institutionalized, if it's part of an organization's internationalization strategy, that really, really helps. So more and more, higher education institutions are focusing on internationalization, although it's been a theme for 20 plus years, but at least here in the US, it seems like there are still plenty of schools that are trying to figure out how to internationalize their curriculum. And virtual exchange has, in my opinion, a big role to play in internationalization higher ed. So that's one way, I think, to incentivize faculty to give this a go. Anybody else have some thoughts?
Well, I was just reading the Q&A by Carine. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. And it really makes me think about this.
Sorry, Sarah, could you read that? I don't know, can everyone see that? I'm not sure.
Carine says,
okay, go ahead.
Opinions differ as to what degree participants in a dialogue should reach a consensus. Some feel that just agreeing to disagree is an easy way out. Do you think the online platforms facilitate learning on a really deep level, which could be transformative? And I'll really leave this in the end to Julie and Indahar, because I think their programs deal with this more than the kind of grassroots work that we do. But in the end, it goes back to what I said about structure and how you build these activities and build these. So I don't think it depends on the tool necessarily, but it depends on how you build the activity and how you're engaging students and the duration of time. Because of course, if students meet with one another for 2 weeks, it's one thing. If it's 8 weeks, you have the ability to build trust and the sense of a safe space over time. So I don't think it's so much an issue of tool as it is how you design activities to engage students with one another. But I think Julie and Indahar will have more to say on that.
Yeah, absolutely. That's true, actually, because bringing students into contact with international partners in virtual exchange is not enough. So we need a good curriculum and also great facilitators to assist in the moderation of these groups, to guide the students to achieve the program goals. So, for example, I'm going to give you an example to ask open-ended questions instead of yes/no questions, to dig deeper into the content of the discussion they're having, and to make sure that participants are not just replying by yes or no. So there are some techniques and some skills that the facilitators have and gain throughout the training that will help them facilitate the dialogue in a good way, to make sure that the participants actually reflect on each other's comments and not just on a listener mode.
Karine, do you have anything?
Well, yeah, I think it just can't be emphasized enough that that the SOLIA program, first of all, it was born out of the 9/11 attacks. We should probably mention that right up front, with a goal to bring together, I believe, U.S. and well, primarily Western cultures and primarily Muslim cultures. Is that a fair way to say it? And so they've done a lot of work in figuring out what kinds of activities work in an online environment to bring students together, exploring identity, exploring conflict, exploring where you get your information, what's fact and what's not. That's tricky. I just feel very privileged to have been through the SOLIA facilitator training and really see the value of bringing students together for a very focused dialogue. And I'll also say that the SOLIA model, as you probably saw on that picture that was on the screen, those students are from different countries. So the grassroots model, where we're doing faculty to faculty who are doing, say, media studies and women's studies in different countries and bringing those together to study the impact of social media on image of women in society or something. That's one kind of way of doing it, in which case you're going to have your students and their students together, mostly usually in dyads. We've seen triads, they're hard to do. But in general, it's going to be your class together with someone else's class. Whereas in the SOLIA model, your students join with a group of other students, and there may only be 2 or 3 of your students from the same institution, and then 2 or 3 from 2 or 3 4 other institutions. Am I describing that correctly, Intinar? So that's a very different, makeup, a different group. Your students are being exposed to many more cultures in one setting. Do you want to elaborate into that?
Yeah, that's what makes students more, into the dialogue, and they want to know more about their peers. And that's how the conversation actually starts. So it's about curiosity. It's about what they're doing in their countries, what they have that I don't have in my country. And that's how the interaction starts. And then they start reflecting on their differences and on the common points they share. And this is the best part of being part of one of the virtual exchange programs, is that you can see different cultures and different perspectives in just one room, and without going anywhere, just in your room, and you're having that insight on different parts of the world. So yeah.
If I can just add to sort of connect the two questions, how I'm seeing it is the initial question was, how can we sort of sell this to institutions, or something along the lines of how do we get people involved? One way is that the short answer to this, can it be transformative question, is yes. And we have metrics on that, because we're sort of doing dialogue at scale. Then, these are things that we're able to monitor and evaluate, and we can, to institutions, say, your students will achieve this percentage of growth in these different transversal skills, and that's quantitative. But then we have all of these other qualitative experience self-reportings of students that say that it was a transformative experience for them. So of course that won't be for everyone, but it certainly does and can happen, and that's what we're designing to happen.
Perfect. Anything else? All right, so let me move to the next question. I would like to ask, is any research being conducted around the impact of virtual exchange? If so, what does it tell us? Have anyone of you see any recent or past research that being conducted on this VE, either negative impact or positive impact, if you can share with us?
Well, clearly that's what Julie just shared with us, that they have evidence of growth. So
yeah, anything else?
Yeah.
I would say that as somebody who's been involved in this field for about 15 years, I'd say until recently, the majority of the research was based on small groups. So it was difficult to generalize. Let's say that you would be doing research on this exchange or that exchange or these students or those students. Whereas I don't know if people in this group are familiar with the Stevens Initiative in the US, and in Europe, the Erasmus Plus Virtual Exchange Initiative. These two initiatives have given us the opportunity to carry out research on a broad scale across different models of virtual exchange, and using both quantitative and qualitative measures. And so far, the results have been positive, in the sense that the majority of people who are engaged in these kinds of activities feel like they are getting something. But it's interesting when you look at the different types of models, depending on the model, they might be gaining more in terms of empathy and listening in one kind of model, and they might be gaining more in terms of collaboration and employability skills in another model of virtual exchange. And these results in terms of Erasmus Plus virtual exchange have been published, and in our first year of 2018, the pilot year, and we're continuing to do the quantitative and qualitative research. But the fact is that it is a new field. It's a growing field, and that's why, going back to what I was saying at the beginning about the journal virtual exchange, we're really trying to push people, encourage people to publish there, so that instead of results being published in various discipline-specific journals, they'll be in one place where it really is about virtual exchange.
Yeah, I would like to add something, is that, for example, in Solea, we have like a pre and post-program evaluation for students. And we do those evaluations to compare or to see the impact that the program did on those students. So I can share some numbers from last semester, for example. 90% of students or participants in the Connect program felt like the program helped them improve their skills in cross-cultural communication. 80% helped them in critical thinking and analysis. 85% of them are glad they participated in the Connect program. So I don't want the list is too long, so I just wanted to give you some insight, is that the numbers are so positive, and I'm sure that those numbers reflected in other virtual exchange programs too. And that's why students don't only want to be part of the program, but they always reaching out to ask about the continued engagement activities. That's what we call them in Solea, which means that they want to stay connected and keep in touch with the alumni community. So that's really great. So I don't want to share any numbers about other research because I don't have right now. So I just wanted to share with you these numbers from Solea.
Thank you.
Can I just add one last thing, because this is something that's kind of close to my heart? As somebody who studied abroad and who engaged in physical mobility, I totally understand the value and the wonderful experience it can be if it's done long-term in an immersive environment. But what we've observed in the past decade, I'd say, in trying to convince people of the value of virtual exchange, is that study abroad, physical mobility people never had to prove that students gain something from traveling abroad. There's this assumption that if you just physically put yourself in another environment, you'll necessarily learn about that environment. Whereas we are in the situation in which we have to, quote unquote, prove that what we do is worthwhile. And I think if any of us had the time to collect the data that all these different projects have gathered over the years, these are real experiences. We say virtual exchange, but they're real experiences. It's all about building relationships. And I think in some cases, to be honest, and I don't have the data to prove this at this moment, but if you engage in a very intense virtual exchange, you really build a relationship with people from other cultures and learn about them and learn about yourself in a way that might not necessarily happen if you just go on a very short-term study abroad. So that was just my little comment there.
Thank you, Sarah. Yeah, I think we have like 10 minutes left. I still want to ask this one last question. You all talked about the positive impact, right, in general, of the virtual exchange. What are some downsides of the VE, and what are some of the key challenges and issues we face for you as a practitioner? Are there any?
There are downsides, I would say, or potential for downsides. I love
Right.
Julie's word virtual encounter instead of virtual exchange, and that sums it up right there. If it stays on the superficial level, if it's in my mind poorly designed, in other words, and again, as an instructional design background person, we begin with the end in mind, and so some virtual exchanges don't have as their foundational principle meaningful cross-cultural exchange or development of cross-cultural competency. They want students to understand, business in Korea or business in the US or graphic design approaches from another country or water management or whatever it is, So even though in the definition we put on the screen to begin with, that is a foundational principle because that is the perspective of the people in this group, that is where our heart is and why we engage in this pedagogy. But that isn't the true for everyone who brings students together cross-culturally. So I think we need to put that out there. And then so secondarily, if it's too short, if it's not designed well, and it's just finish this task, okay, everybody post a picture of your favorite whatever landmark. And let's all put them together in a Google Slides and we'll call it cross-cultural exchange, and you explain yours and I'll explain mine, and away we go. And so you stay sort of at the level of, look at everything we have in common. They love their children too, and this is how they care for their elderly, and we don't ever really get into anything that's difficult. And so, yeah, I mean, I guess it's not necessarily a downside if that's all you had in mind. But if you're really trying to obtain growth and broadening of a student's perspective and of their global mindset, that may not be achieved. And or the opposite could happen where, as I think someone mentioned, where we just agree to disagree, and maybe that was in the chat, just don't go anywhere. So what do other people think?
Yeah, I'm thinking more along your lines of not necessarily downsides, but risks. And I think it's really important to realize that there are risks. And I think that's a mistake people can make when they're bringing people together online, is just to think, oh, it's just online, so this isn't having, such an impact that we need to mitigate for these things. But you're bringing together people, and in that is inherently, some possibilities of things going wrong. Thinking about the Sharing Perspectives Foundation and the work that we do specifically, our last year's programs and ongoing currently are bringing specifically refugees in Europe together with non-refugees in Europe. And so you have these different power dynamics and minority groups and intense cross-cultural differences and things that we need to be aware of, things like spokesmanship or things like having the needle moved the opposite way towards warmness towards other cultures, or just challenging encounters that then turn people off towards future opportunities for exchange. So there's a lot of things that we have to be aware of and mitigate for.
Reinforcing stereotypes, for example.
Yeah, exactly. It's a huge one, yeah.
Sure. So I saw some comments and questions in the Q&A box. I would like to address them here briefly. I would like to read Nancy Ruther. Hi, Nancy. She has comments on triads also may lead to all personnel. They're tricky but can work. This is not a question, this is comments.
Well, I'll just pick up on that real quickly. So what I didn't explain myself clearly. So what I meant by triads was 3 organizations, or 3 classes, 3 courses at 3 different institutions in 3 different countries. I didn't mean that the students would be working in triads necessarily, but and you're right, odd man out, odd person out doesn't work very well. So, but when you have triad organizations, just in terms of academic calendar, time zone differences, language challenges, technology, et cetera, that gets, an order of magnitude more difficult. But if you're having students do group work, yes, having them in threesies probably could be risky. And there are trainings about how to manage for all of this stuff. And I guess if we could just skip to Nancy's second comment, they're related. She says, with due respect to study abroad, virtual exchange actually aims to do more than cross-cultural skills in many cases. And I say to that, yes, indeed. And I really resist the idea that virtual exchange is somehow the lesser version of study abroad. They're just not the same thing. They're just apples and oranges. And so we shouldn't try to pretend that this is sort of a second-class study abroad experience, because as I alluded earlier, taking students on a junket to Paris and London and Berlin is not the same thing as what we're doing by any stretch. So.
Sure. So Kelly, your question is in regard to how do your organization work? Who do you partner with? Where does the money come from? So we actually have a webinar recording. So you may, when you receive the webinar, we actually talk about this at the first 20 minutes. Each one of the panelists actually introduce their organization and who they partner with, and sort of answer the question regarding of the cost. So if you have the time, we welcome you to review that webinar. Our last question from Linda. What's a good next first step for somebody like me who is completely new to this? She said, I teach online. Virtual exchange is completely new to me. So any of you would like to share some of the good tip and your experience with Sarah? Oh, with Linda, sorry, with Linda.
I've done a lot of talking. Who wants to start?
No, I was just going to say that I think it depends. I think there are kind of these two options that Karine has mentioned from the start. There's the option of getting your students engaged with existing programs and curriculum that exist through Sharing Perspectives, which Julie represents, and Solia, which Indaha represents. And the other option is the grassroots, so that you build up from your own experience working together with another faculty member. In the case of the grassroots, it's best to get training, because kind of like when online learning and teaching started, 2 decades ago or even more, people thought they could just transfer online what they've been doing in the classroom, and you can't, right? It's different online. What you do online is different, and the way you engage students is different. So I think training is a really important part of that, and it's something, so we as Uni Collaboration, we don't provide programs, we provide training for people who are interested in setting up their own programs. So I would say that there are these two options, right? That there's the one option of maybe the Sharing Perspectives Solia option is a nice starting place, so you get your students engaged in the curriculum that are relevant to what you're teaching, and you don't have to necessarily come up with all the activities, because they've put the expertise in there and they have the facilitators. And but the other option, depending on the discipline you're working in, the content that you're interested in, is actually doing training yourselves together with a partner to develop your own exchange.
Mm-hmm. We have a note in the chat that's a reminder that if you're looking for a partner, that Uni Collaboration sponsors a partnering fair virtually online. There'll be one coming up, I believe, on May 23rd. That doesn't teach you how to do a virtual exchange, but that does help if finding someone else who's like-minded and also wants to try a virtual exchange. And another thing is if you're a Twitter follower, you don't have to be a Twitter user, but if you peek on Twitter, there is a hashtag virtual exchange, where there's lots of activity about what's happening. If you're interested in the grassroots exchange, as Sarah said, Uni Collaboration offers training. Did someone else want to chime in? Sorry.
Yeah. So I just was reading what Jessica wrote about comparing virtual exchange to online learning. I think the real difference, and maybe the other panelists will have something to add to this, is really the interactive component. Virtual exchange is all about students and young people interacting with one another, okay? They're not interacting with content. Content may be a basis for discussions that they have, but it's really about interacting with one another. And that focus on interaction, we have found in our trainings, for example, is one of the biggest challenges, because professors tend to be hyper-focused on content And you're like, no, you need to stop thinking about the content and focus on the fact that students are connecting with one another to learn from one another. So I think online learning and virtual exchange are very different, and that is the primary difference, is the degree of interaction.
Thank you. That's a very good question and also very thoughtful explanation. And we are actually at the top of the hour. So with that, I'd like to thank all the panelists for sparing your time and joining us today. And I also would like to thank audiences for really engaging in this conversation. There will be a full video recording for this webinar, so please reach out with other colleagues. Now also please watch your emails because we will be sending more details regarding the time and topic for the next webinar. Stay tuned. At this moment, I would like to thank you again, everyone, for joining us today, and I hope you have a wonderful day. Thank you.